Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Oh wow, Overcomers with Our Word. Guys, today I want to talk about the subject of this video is when narcissists use scripture against you. So let's talk about the narcissists we encounter in church. I grew up in the South, and although I was reared in a two-parent home, it was a home steeped in extreme religion and under the influence and control of an iron-willed mother. We spent a lot of time at church, on average, about 4 days out of the week. My mother taught Sunday school, and she spent a significant amount of her time studying scripture using concordances and biblical dictionaries and all of this. So the children were taught by the adults, mostly the women, and they were placed in those positions by the pastor. In many of our neighborhoods, the church was viewed as, and in many respects today, is still considered a family. The narcissistic family structure is tantamount to a cult. So there's no coincidence that churches seem to be infested with them. In the narcissistic family, there's the individual who has established himself or herself as the authoritarian leader, who has absolute power over the other members of the family, over their reality, their behaviors, their perceptions, and what the leader says is right is what's going to be right in that home. So there has to be this indoctrination of what those rules are going to be. They have to break you down, strip you of your individuation, your will, and then change and reset you to live the mindset and reality of the cult leader. This, unfortunately, is achieved through some form of abuse. And the younger it's done to you, the better for them, as you'll be easier to control and less likely to even realize that what's happening to you is abuse. The leader does harm to the members, or the leader allows other family members to inflict such pain or trauma, whether it's verbal, physical, emotional, sexual, or all of the aforementioned, to ensure their loyalty to and dependence upon the leader. In order for there to be this common belief, this indoctrination, there can be no individuality, and no one can have personal boundaries or privacy of their space, personal belongings, not even their bodies. The family image, which is created by the leader, takes importance over the abuse of any one individual in it. So conformity is expected, and you're not allowed to challenge anything. As a child, I was studious, ambitious, headstrong, independent, had big dreams of being an artist, dancer, model. I loved all things artistic, synchronized swimming, ice skating. I love sports such as track and field. I love gymnastics, but I was an avid reader, always loved reading, and was very inquisitive. However, asking questions was not valued, and the questions were often left unanswered, and I was generally just ignored. The lesson for me to be learned, I guess, at that time was that what I wanted and who I was didn't matter. The older I became, we began to go through, the normal sibling rivalry in the home, fighting over the television, the telephone, or food, or things like that. And my mother never intervened, never assisted in setting boundaries or mutual respect among her children, nor did she promote any guidelines for fair fighting or how to even resolve issues. So when things escalated into more serious offenses, it became likened to the law of the jungle, everyone for himself, survival of the fittest. When I'd voiced my anger or displeasure, I was often met with cliches in scripture, being told how selfish I was. It was as if she was saying, "How dare you," thinking you or your belongings deserve to be respected or protected. I was often told to be better to others than what was being done to me. But that reasoning was illogical and a misuse of scripture, because no one, in essence, was really being good to me. I was basically being told to accept whatever treatment I was receiving. And then you get the scriptures. As a child, the meaning of those scriptures were taught to us by the adults. They would have you open the Bible to physically see something with your eyes, but the meaning was never self-derived. It was drilled into us. I won't go into all the things we learned about God. Although scripture said God is love, we were actually taught to fear God, and not in a figurative sense, and not from a perspective of reverence, but a literal fear. And I'll go into a separate video later on how they actually do some of that indoctrination, getting you to fear God. One movie they used in particular was very key. But anyway, I won't go off on that tangent. But while I am on this subject, I don't want to give the impression that only churches are guilty of religious abuse and that those on a spiritual path are somehow exempt from this. The church or religious abusers have their tactics. One in particular, they always use the phrase God said to justify whatever their demands upon you are. And the spiritual abusers will often say, if you're not achieving this desired result in your life, you're not thinking or being positive enough. Guys, abuse exists anywhere and in anything where something or someone is being used or exploited for another person's gain. But let's look at Scripture. Satan knew Scripture in and out and even used it in his attempts to tempt Christ. But Scripture also says we must learn to become as wise as the serpent by not remaining ignorant of their devices, but so that we can be what? Harmless as a dove. When one has suffered abuse, the church and narc leaders are quick to tell you that we all make mistakes, that no one is perfect, and that we're not to take one another to the law, and that God says we must forgive. Saying these things to a person harmed somehow makes it seem as if you're in the wrong for wanting justice. If I ever solicited my mother for help or complained about the unwanted behavior of my brothers towards me, Matthew 7:3 was always used against me, or was often used against me. Why do I see the speck that is in my brother's eye, but not notice the log that's in my own eye? As if to say, his offense to me was a speck. My complaining about the offense was the log. And when I went to church leaders about abuse, that I encountered, again, more Scripture, in particular that we were not to take one another to the law, meaning they knew that some of the things that we were encountering should have gone to the law, and that vengeance is mine, I will repay, said the Lord, was another one of their favorites. As a child, I eventually stopped asking questions. On some occasions, I'd get slapped in the face or punched for doing so. So I didn't challenge my mother with the log and the eye Scripture. I guess it was expected for me to come to the understanding that I was the one somehow wrong for expecting others to be punished for their evil actions. I suffered for years thinking how unjust and unloving God was. I was so angry, and it took over 20 years of suffering under the weight of the wounds of the abuse, well into my late 30s, to learn that it had nothing to do with God, but the people I believed who were supposedly representing God. If you have purchased my book, I speak in detail on the abuse of Scripture and how I was made to feel worse than those in the world that if we utilize the law in any manner. But Scripture clearly says the law is there for those who do wrong, but cult churches and narcissistic cult families will not teach that. It was always peculiar to me to see that the victim was always punished for speaking up, but the offenders were never reprimanded. Scripture says that we'll be taught doctrine by demons, and that Satan himself can be transformed into an angel of light. So don't think it's no great thing if his ministers can also be transformed as ministers of righteousness. Guys, cliches and improper use of Scripture is meant to shut down critical thinking, often to lead the target to take non-action where action is truly warranted. You see, a narcissist has a cycle. They love bomb you to draw you in, and once you're emotionally open to them, then they become critical of what you do and who you are to start breaking you down. Then next they inflict some sort of pain on you, physical, emotional, verbal, mental, sexual. Then they discard you to make you believe it was your fault, grant you a fake apology to pull you back in, and then start with another round of love bombing to start the process all over again until they have either tired of you, broken you down, mentally, financially, sexually, emotionally, or have found a better source of supply, and then they totally discard you as if you never existed. Adding a religious component to this process magnifies the abuse, and the strategic improper use of Scripture intensifies the control and hold over the victim, making it harder for the target to escape or even realize they need to. I've rarely shared the personal details of my life story, but when I did, on one occasion, I was asked how I could have ever dealt with my family at all. That's part of the trauma bonding that occurs in a narcissistic cult family or church, and what's abnormal becomes your new normal in order to survive. As a child, if I was going to eat or sleep, have a roof over my head, it was my abusers that I had to deal with who provided it. All beings don't deserve forgiveness, but I say give it to them anyway. Love yourself enough to want to be whole, to be healed, to be free. So here's a response to a narcissist who uses scripture twisting in an effort to keep you in a relationship. When they fail to openly acknowledge their wrongdoings against you, when they show no remorse, when they fail to change their behavior and have no intent to make you whole, learn how to cut your losses quickly and get out. Save yourself. When they tell you you need to forgive them, tell them, yes, you're right. I do need to forgive you. But there seems to be something about me that continually causes you to engage in sinful, harmful behavior. And being that we're all members of this body, and scripture says if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off. So as your sister, I will no longer tempt you to cause harm. You see, they use scripture to manipulate and harm. But what did scripture say? You become as wise as them, but harmless as a dove. So you use scripture, speaking truth in love, and remove yourself from the harm. Forgive them. Forgive yourself. Heal the wounds. Set proper boundaries and let them go. If you'd like to purchase my book, or if you would like to book one-on-one coaching sessions, please check out my website. I'll post a link below. Guys, do know you're not on your journey alone. There is support. Let's do this. Let's overcome. So until the next video, guys, may you all be well.